This whole video is about the British healthcare system and how the system needs to be changed. Bad envious coder, I'm going to be really clear. Then why is she talking about gender dysphoria? Oh, wait. She's switching terms and playing a shell game with language because she doesn't actually know what she's talking about. Every time she says gender dysphoria, I want to scream because she's using the colloquial definition, not the diagnostic criteria. But then she cites the DSM-5. So now we're talking about the diagnostic criteria, except the UK doesn't use the DSM-5. It uses the ICD-11, and that doesn't have gender dysphoria in it. It has fucking gender incongruity. What is going on? Hey everyone. So we were on break for longer than we planned because we had a bunch of life stuff come up. And then a trans woman I respected said some dumb shit online and we need to talk about it. For those who don't know, Abigail Thorne, also known as Philosophy Tube, had a video a couple of videos back where she talked about how she had to email her doctor X number of times because healthcare in the UK is abhorrent for trans people. You have to wait months. She apparently had to email her doctor. I believe the name of the video is 133 times. The crisis of British healthcare. So here's the thing. This is what she said. When it comes to gender dysphoria, this is the BMJ. This is the patient-centered, evidence-based, and independent practice of journalism group. When it comes to gender dysphoria, there has been little constructive dialogue, writes this person in this week's editorial choice. Can a better application of evidence as well as the limits of medicine improve the debate and practice of the area? Abigail Thorne, probably because gender dysphoria was made up based on unreliable data by a bunch of cis doctors, multiple of whom have since been disgraced. We shouldn't need some cis person's fantasy diagnosis to transition. The fact that we want to is enough. And then someone goes, girl, what are you talking about? People are definitely feeling dysphoric. Oh, for sure. And combustible bodies definitely released phlogiston. Otherwise, how can you explain the loss of mass? She's talking about pseudoscience. So I'm going to be really clear here. This was tremendously stupid. I know the video goes into more about it. We'll talk about it. I also know she wrote an article. We'll talk about it. Here's what we got to talk about, though. My original response. Yes, and we need to reframe how we think about this. Gender dysphoria in my practice is treated as due to the trauma of body and behavior not matching your internal gender experience. It is not used as gatekeeping. Also, WPATH 8 covers this. We'll get to more about that in a minute. Also, APA already says that gender dysphoria isn't needed to be trans. So at least in America, Abigail is incorrect. I would have to check the ICD guidelines as far as the UK. Also, the data around gender dysphoria is reliable. If you're saying it isn't real, no diagnostic construct is real by the made-up measure. Again, diagnoses are social constructs by which to sort of aggregate a series of observable or reportable behaviors to sort of get an idea of how these different groupings work together. They're a construct. There's a reason why there's certain types of symptoms that are associated with the construct of schizophrenia, right?
Or like EMDD, as we talked about, right?
Yes. So mommy did some searching because mommy does research, and this is what happened. Yeah, we might have to go over Philosophy Tube's gender dysphoria nonsense when we return to stream, like we are now. This really bothers me. It's not just a bad take. It is factually incorrect and conflates medical gatekeeping, especially in the UK, with how we come to diagnostic constructs. To say that gender dysphoria isn't real, you need to refute the data around how the construct was come to. I agree that gender identity disorder was and is gatekeeping, but that was in the previous DSMs and was in the previous ICD-10. But gender dysphoria was specifically studied to stop that. I must remind you that as well, that according to the American, that should say Psychiatric Association. The American Psychiatric Association says this: not all transgender people suffer from gender dysphoria, and that distinction is important to keep in mind. Gender dysphoria and or coming out as transgender can occur at any age. The UK is, of course, a different story, but I think that we can be against gatekeeping without going into a kind of denialism about the pathological harm gender dysphoria does. WPATH 8 says in the diversity versus diagnosis section,
the expression of gender characteristics, including identities, that are not stereotypically associated with one's sex assigned at birth is a common and a culturally diverse human phenomenon that should not be seen as inherently negative or pathological. Unfortunately, gender nonconformity and diversity in gender identity and expression is stigmatized in many societies around the world. Such stigma can lead to prejudice and discrimination, resulting in minority stress. Minority stress is unique, additive to general stressors experienced by all people, socially based and chronic, and may take TGD, transgender and gender diverse, individuals more vulnerable to developing mental health concerns such as anxiety and depression. In addition to prejudice and discrimination in society at large, stigma can contribute to abuse and neglect in one's interpersonal relationships, which in turn can lead to psychological distress. However, these symptoms are socially induced and are not inherent to being TGD. While gender dysphoria is still considered a mental health condition in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders of the American Psychiatric Association, gender incongruence is no longer seen as a pathological or a mental disorder in the World Health community. Gender incongruence is recognized as a condition in the International Classification of Diseases and Related Health Problems, 11th version of the World Health Organization, or the ICD-11. Because of historical and current stigma, TGD people can experience distress or dysphoria that may be addressed with various gender-affirming treatment options. While nomenclature is subject to change, a new terminology and classification may be adopted by various health organizations or administrative bodies. The medical necessity of treatment and care is clearly recognized for the many people who experience dissonance between their sex assigned at birth and their gender identity. Go ahead, love. Right there. Yeah.
Based on everything I can find, the UK uses the ICD. So when I read this, I think that the issue is that the ICD still views gender incongruence as pathological, even though it says it doesn't, because it conflates gender dysphoria and social stigma with being necessary to being trans and gender diverse, rather than potential results that can come from being gender incongruent. So to me, it seems like using the term gender dysphoria in these arguments is either wrong or a kind of dishonest sleight of hand. Gender dysphoria is real and should be treated. It is not intended to be a gatekeeping measure. It can't be if it is not required to be trans. The requirement was most likely done in the US by insurance companies not wanting to pay for gender-affirming healthcare. That or bigoted doctors and clinicians. I am not defending those practices, but when you say gender dysphoria was made up by cis people to gatekeep, it sounds tremendously wrong to me. If we are talking about the UK, we aren't talking about gender dysphoria. We are talking about the ICD and gender incongruity. The issue with the ICD is that it is wrong and seems to be working as intended, quote unquote. If that is the case, then I agree that reforms are desperately needed because that seems fucked. But gender dysphoria and the DSM-5, not the ICD. As far as I can find, gender dysphoria does not appear in the ICD, so why the fuck are we talking about it? If the National Health Service is an issue, then the ICD needs revision, but this isn't a gender dysphoria issue. To say so is fractally wrong. This feels like moving goalposts or ignorance.
Yeah.
So to kind of give you a synopsis of what the fuck I'm talking about here, because it's kind of important. There's a difference between the colloquial definition of gender dysphoria, the thing we all talk about that sucks about being trans because we dislike parts of our bodies or parts of our, role or whatnot, and gender dysphoria, the diagnosis. The gender dysphoria diagnosis was a win by trans activists because before it was gender identity disorder. It was separated out because the dysphoria portion can be pathological. It can hurt you, but it doesn't mean that being trans is inherently pathological. That's the important distinction. And even though the ICD doesn't classify in gender incongruity as a disease, it still seems to conflate being trans in that mixture of things. So if you look here, the ICD-11, which came into effect January 1st, 2022, significantly revised the classification of gender identity-related conditions. Under the conditions related to sexual health, the ICD-11 lists gender incongruence, which is coded in 3 conditions. Unspecified, childhood, adolescence, and adult. There is no reference to dysphoria here.
So some things that came up for me as you were reading off your tweet was that it seems like with this inherent idea, it seems to almost make it out to be that because society isn't quite there yet or not accepting yet, stuff things, therefore there is trauma from this thing, therefore trauma and dysphoria from that is now inherent to being trans. That's the logic that I kind of get, which is really borked because that doesn't imagine a world that is actually like accepting, right?
Yeah, and that's the problem is that while the ICD tends to be usually ahead of us, like genuinely speaking, this is a really weird outcome because what it essentially is doing is conflating still. It's not saying the gender identity part is the disorder anymore, but it's essentially saying the gender incongruity part leads to these other issues. So why is Abigail talking about gender dysphoria? Well, because that's the colloquial term we use in the trans community. But that's not the term used in the UK that meets diagnosis. And in fact, we can even go into WPATH 8 and show that there are times in which the amount of letters necessary for surgeries has been decreased and in some cases can be waived. Now, insurance companies are still, working on this. That is still a thing. WPATH 8 takes time to be accepted. I believe Blue Cross Blue Shield already has. I'm not sure about other ones. While none of this is perfect and gatekeeping is cringe, what Abigail's doing here is taking some bizarrely ivory tower philosophy moment and turning it into this really dumb take.
Also, dysphoria is already its own psychological construct on its own, right? And so I find it really weird to say that like dysphoria doesn't exist or a kind of dysphoria doesn't exist. PMDD has dysphoria in the name. That's what I have. Premenstrual dysphoria disorder. There's already a definition for how this thing can come up for people and how that is, used by clinicians to describe phenomenon that they observe. Yeah. So it makes it really weird to me to just go, no, this thing that people observe isn't a thing.
To write this in this way comes off as incredibly flippant and also incredibly invalidating. It was so funny because like Brianna Wu, who I guess has been interacting with Destiny, which sucks, but then also like Contra, though she deleted the tweet as she often does, basically said gender dysphoria is real, smiley face, because it is. People are suffering. They struggle with this. If you've ever interacted with people who have extreme gender dysphoria, like the people in the 80s, guess what? There were people that were so dysphoric that they tried to cut it off. I know, because I've read those cases. Guess what? When you say stuff like this in the most derogatory and frankly irresponsible way humanly possible, this is absolutely insane. And it makes me question anything I liked by Philosophy Tube now. Because it is such a brain-dead take. Now, do you want to say that we shouldn't have a disorder that gatekeeps this? I agree, we shouldn't. But the gatekeeping doesn't happen at the doctoral level. It happens at the insurance level, because we have to force insurance companies in our country. If you have universal health care, this wouldn't be an issue. Also, WPATH 8 alleviates a lot of these issues, at least when it's instituted here. So the problem we get into is that Abigail seems to not know what she's actually on about. I get being mad that the UK healthcare is awful. The NHS sounds bad. But they don't have gender dysphoria as a diagnosis. People have gender dysphoria in the colloquial sense. So you're conflating the colloquial definition with the actual diagnostic criteria. Now, here's the thing. I have seen people who have held my perspective basically been called trans medicalists, and I'm going to tell you guys something real simple. Please go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
Zena and I on this stream have utterly defended non-binary people. We are both technically non-binary ourselves. We have defended xenogender people. We both technically identify as xenogender. The fact of the matter is that to say that gender dysphoria exists and is meaningful and to just get rid of that is insane. And again, we are going to look at her article. We are going to look at her video. But I want to make it clear just from that tweet. This kind of rhetoric does harm. Because when you try to attack these types of concepts, one of the problems is, let's say you try to get rid of the gender dysphoria requirement, the thing that we use as a wedge to force insurance to pay. Well, then how do you force insurance to pay? I'm not saying it's great, but guess what happens then? Until you get universal health care, basically what happens is you can forcibly cause people to detransition because, oh, you don't have to have this to do this. You don't. The American Psychiatric Association already agreed. This is already a confirmed thing within the mental health community. No one's created this gate except for the insurance companies. Have some doctors and clinicians probably done this as well? Sure. But again, to come out so hard swinging with such imprecise language.
Well, you end up educating a lot of trans people incorrectly and in a way that is super fucking invalidating too.
Yes, Morningstar Council, I get that she's arguing against that, and I think she's wrong. Because I think she's not taking an actually systemic view, and I can make this very clear within the US. Without gender dysphoria as a diagnosis, how do you force insurance companies to pay out? You are talking about a massive systemic overhaul that, let's be clear, none of us can have a force.
Most of our US healthcare, a lot of it is, I know your insurance company likes to be like, hey, preventative care, let's have you do the thing. Okay, well, if that actually meant anything, you'd give us way more access to, like, dental. All right?
I am listening, Morningstar Council. I just don't think you like it. I love you, but please, listen to what I'm saying. Abigail Thorne is literally fractally incorrect.
Okay, so our insurance companies base a lot of what they do and what is covered in medical in the US as far as where there is a problem. Okay, you have cancer, your cells are, not working properly. You have migraines, which are really fucking rough. Breathing issues, okay? All of these things. A lot of our healthcare is based off of there being something wrong or something that's not working properly. So yeah, at the moment, gender dysphoria is there, all right? Also, when I know clinicians, there are cases where people are struggling so much with gender dysphoria that no, like, you need to be able to treat them. That is an entire topic of, like, education that needs to happen for clinicians to be able to treat people and get them the proper help, right? And so if we haven't even identified that there could be something there, right, i.e. taking away the diagnosis entirely, then how do you, like, train clinicians to work with that population in the first place? At the end of the day, a trans person who isn't really dealing with dysphoria, isn't really dealing with this, they probably show up to the clinician, to therapist to get their letters, right? Like, what, do you want me to pause, or you just...
No, I want to respond to something Asher said real quick. Is there any idea, like, to make everything informed consent? Here's my issue with informed consent.
Or would that make the problem worse? So that's where Asher's starting from.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. In Farmington Hills, we have a top surgeon who does informed consent for surgeries. You require no letters. As far as I've talked to every trans man that's worked for this person, for $5,000, you can just get them lopped off. And that's the extent of what's happening. This person is a butcher. I know we don't like gatekeeping, but the problem with informed consent is it is a paper thin issue. And the problem is, and this is where I'm going to get really pissed off, because I know a bunch of people are going to get real upset with me about this, and I'm fine with that. There are middle cases where there are people who have just enough developmental delay or difficulties or cognitive issues where they don't quite meet the issue of needing a guardian, but still necessarily can't function without certain types of support. I have never once denied anybody a letter for HRT or for surgeries, once. And one of the clinicians I've worked with has only done it once. Do you know why? Because the person was so severely mentally ill and not able to function, but just above the line of care to not need a guardian. And the problem is they couldn't keep up with a regular regimen of actual HRT. They couldn't actually keep up on the medications effectively in a way that would have been safe for their body. Yeah. These are the things we weigh out. When you just do informed consent, none of that gets weighed out. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. I don't like the system the way it is. I fight against it all the time. I try to speed this process up as fast as possible with every client I work with. But the problem is I don't think people think this through. They just want this to be accessible in every conceivable way. And again, I do too.
It is a really hard one, because if you're not used to working with people who have different abilities, or abilities are different places, then no, people don't tend to think of this stuff at all. But even in our household or in our community, no, we have to weigh this stuff out. Like, it's the same thing with, like, our young adult moving out. Are they ready? There are some very real questions that we have to ask. And same thing with medical care, right? There are people in our community who also know what the struggle is like, to be struggling with depression and being able to take medications, consistently, right? Like, there are some stuff that could really mess you up and make everything much worse and much more difficult for you. And if you're, like, up and down on hormones constantly, no! Take it from all the PMDD folks, that's not what you want happening to you. That is bad, okay? That will mess you up even more.
I'm also going to say, for the record, just as a thing, I totally am supportive of people doing DIY, as long as they're careful. You're getting regular, like, blood work, things like that. We are talking about things that, if done wrong, can cause harm.
Well,
I am not saying that being trans is this or that or the anything. I am not saying this, but I'm sorry. I do not subscribe to this notion that, like, we need to just open the door and not actually think about the consequences of our actions. Because the problem is that, as based as it would be to be like, yeah, let's just get rid of all of this, we still live in a country where insurance companies rule, and if you get rid of that diagnosis, these people don't pay out. Informed consent exists because of the need for personal freedom. I agree.
right.
And generally, I'm fine with informed consent as long as a doctor is still overseeing in regards to, yeah, harm reduction isn't gatekeeping. Absolutely, Zeffy or Zelfie. And again, the thing is that yes, personal freedom, but you still want to be overseen by a doctor because you are still medically transitioning. You still want that help. There have been people who've done DIY perfectly. There have been people who've done DIY real badly and actually fucked up their transitions. I am not trying to in any way, shape, or form say that we should not get rid of every gate that's unnecessary. What I am saying is I do not subscribe to this notion that you should just throw open the doors and not consider the ramifications of your actions. And if that makes me somehow a lib or a prop, I don't fucking care. None of you work in my field. As far as I'm concerned, none of anybody about this knows what's going on. I will look at what Abigail said elsewhere, but as far as I'm concerned, this did harm. And it literally caused a bunch of trans meds, which, whatever, to lose their shit and basically go after her. In fact, again, I disagree with her arguments, but I don't support this crap. This person literally went through and said, sorry, I didn't put it on screen,
Oh, I want to.
basically just misgendered her and said that she wasn't, yes, Bun is whining because Bun really wants attention. Basically that, like,
Touch.
decided to just misgender her.
Yes,
This
good
isn't
call.
appropriate. I'm not supporting this. I'm not doing the trans med argument.
Well, and I want to be clear too. When we're talking on a systemic level, as far as the overall systems or a rules level for what, not rules, like protocols, legality, all of that stuff is, that's not the same as being like, hey, so and so, you shouldn't go to the informed consent thing at Planned Parenthood and do it. No, like, if you need HRT, fucking look into it, look into the people you're getting it from, and like do it properly. Like, that's okay. But as far as a system, no, we need to have the proper supports in place. And that's where I think people are getting, like, somebody I think got that really confused of like, no, I don't want to see Planned Parenthoods stop doing HRT. I want the entire system to change in a way that there is actual better supports along with that.
So,
right?
I am not going to in any way, Zena's 100% by the way correct.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not defending this person in any way, shape, or form. Full stop. This is repugnant. Abigail Thorne, Philosophy Tube, is a woman. 1000%. There is no argument to this. To say this is insane. And I want to be really clear. I don't support this. I do understand, however, what happens when a person feels invalidated. I'm not justifying it, but the hurt people thing feels relevant here. A lot of people reacted poorly to this. And some of that behavior was utterly repugnant. I don't support it, but I understand because essentially in such an inaccurate way, Philosophy 2 basically said that your pain isn't real. Yeah, I'm going to say it. It's offense versus harm.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is I get why these people are offended. I get why it is. And they feel invalidated and they hurt. They're offended. Rightfully so. But the thing I'm upset about her is not trying to invalidate my dysphoria. My dysphoria is real. She can go fuck herself on that. And I don't think that's what she actually believes. She's talking about gatekeeping. But I think that this idea of trying to change, or like wanting to just take away systems without understanding how those systems work or understanding why they are the way they are is, in my humble opinion, potentially just devastating. Because sometimes that diagnosis is the thing that gets you the ability to transition. And as Callum McAllister said in YouTube chat, philosophy is about precision of language. If she meant gatekeeping, she really needs to apply philosophical rigor to her terms. Fucking true. Now, I just had Morningstar Council in chat just tell us to go fuck ourselves. Now,
What?
and I want to be really clear about this. If you think I'm off, if you think this is, that's fine. I don't care. My goal is harm reduction and to help as many people transition as humanly possible. I think risk assessment and risk analysis is important. I think the fact that we want people to do this in the safest way possible is important. I still support DIY as long as you know what you're getting into and you're getting blood work. I can hold both of these views because I know sometimes the system doesn't work and there needs to be workarounds.
Well, and again, there's a risk assessment happening right there. Okay, you are taking risks on your own body. Like, we would like to lessen that, but can't always do it. Also, if the best you've got is go fuck yourself, like, why are you on our stream? Like, I'm sorry, please show up with an argument. Please.
All right, I want to get through this so I can snuggle my partner. Although probably to save our voices, I'm going to let the robot do it.
That sounds good.
There's a moment in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar when Decius comes to Caesar's house and summons him before the Senate, only for Caesar to refuse the call. Shocked, Decius says, "Most mighty Caesar, let me know some cause, lest I be laughed at when I tell them so." Caesar replies, "The cause is in my will. I will not go." It's a revealing moment for Caesar's character, and I think it also reveals something about the nature of political freedom. I have freedom of movement within my country. That means if I want to go to Bristol, for example, I don't need permission. If someone stops me and asks why I'm going, I don't have to tell them. I don't even need a reason, I can go on a whim. It may be that my car won't start, in that case I am not free in the practical sense. But to have legal and social freedom of movement means I am not accountable to anyone else when I attempt to move. To have this kind of freedom places limits on what authorities may demand of us. No wonder Caesar ruffles so many feathers when he refuses the summons, he puts himself above Rome. We might apply this lens to sexual consent. If someone refuses to have sex with a potential partner, they don't need a reason beyond the fact that they just don't want to. Or bodily autonomy. A pregnant person seeking an abortion shouldn't need a reason, they don't want to be pregnant anymore and that's that. Or privacy, I have nothing to hide, but I still don't want the government reading my emails. We can all be mini Caesars, the cause is in our will.
Okay, so far I don't think this is a relevant argument to what we're talking about, but go off, let's keep going.
I think we can apply it to transition also. Earlier this year I spoke outside Downing Street at a rally condemning the government's exclusion of trans people from the proposed ban on conversion therapy. I said, "My body does not belong to the state, it does not belong to my parents, it does not belong to God, it belongs to me." In a happy coincidence, I was wearing earrings shaped like laurel wreaths. However, our efforts to center bodily autonomy in stories of transition are stymied by the concept of gender dysphoria. I think we would benefit from moving beyond this concept. I think it's outdated, deeply harmful, and rooted in a philosophical mistake. The philosopher Gilbert Ryle tells a story about a man who goes to Oxford and sees the colleges and the students and the library and then asks, "Yes, but where is the university? You must show me that." He has made what philosophers call a category error. He thinks the university is some extra thing, but it's just a word for the things he's seen already. In the years of denial before I realized I was trans, I often thought, I am jealous of women, especially trans women. I wish I had features X, Y, and Z, and I am sad that I do not, so sad that I often wish I was dead. But I do not have dysphoria. In hindsight, this was a category error. Those feelings, jealousy, sadness, wishing, were dysphoria.
Morningstar Council, you gotta stick around for the entire argument.
Also, I'm gonna be really clear. Like,
we're talking about a systemic stuff. This is why I talk about lenses constantly on this channel. A lot of times when Poppy and I are here, we are talking on a systemic level or an advocating level, not on an interpersonal level or what you should do as an individual, okay? Those are different things, all right? And I think you got to watch out for when you get really emotionally invested in something, all right? Both Poppy and I deal with mental illness. We both do.
Yeah,
right?
Also to some degree, like, again, I never said being severely mentally ill means you don't get HRT. That's a very reductive thing of what I've said. No. What I specifically said was there are edge cases between where someone who needs guardianship and doesn't that require a lot of deft work in order to make sure that you don't hurt a person. I feel like you overreacted a lot. And I think I've actually made it clear on this channel and in my behavior that I support trans rights and people transitioning. So I take radical offense to the jumping to that conclusion.
Well, and I gotta be really clear. This idea that, like, okay, you're struggling And then you go to a gender therapist and they're just going to be like, well, no, and forever no, and this answer will never turn into a yes. What the shit, okay? Your therapist is somebody that works with you to help improve the quality of your life. All right? If they're not doing that, get a new therapist. They work for you. So, no, if you are truly struggling and you really want to be on HRT and you need to figure out the steps to make sure that you can do HRT safely, no, ask your fucking therapist for help.
So here's
they will do it. That's the point.
Here's my thing. I'm going to be really, really clear. Like, let's get back to this. Abigail's logic does not follow. She is asking for bodily autonomy. I'm with you. No one owns your body. Correct. But I still think medical and psychological professionals should oversee certain types of treatment. I just do. And I'm actually going to give a really hot take. I think most cosmetic surgery, especially certain types of cosmetic surgery, should require more gatekeeping. I'm not talking about for trans people. I'm talking about for cis people. Another content creator, when I had posted initially that I was against this take, I'm not going to say who it is because I love them. I love it deeply. But what it basically said was, how is it not dysphoria when, a woman wants to go to get a Brazilian butt lift? How is that not the same thing? It is. I think that we should have more gatekeeping on plastic surgery because I think plastic surgery is something that's been shown in the literature to be something that can be abused by people, or something that can become addictive, or something that can be deeply rooted in psychological issues. In fact, my prescription is to lighten the gatekeeping for trans people because our situation is different, and I actually reject the idea that these two things are similar. They are superficially similar because both get what is called cosmetic surgery. No, one of them is literally life-saving surgery. The other one is in a different category. This idea that there should be a stigma against medical oversight. No, I think medical oversight is a thing. I think we need to be careful. Does that mean that I don't think we should allow trans kids? No. Fuck no. I've been directly supportive of this. I don't understand how people get so fucking triggered about this. Yeah, a cis woman getting breast implants that are so hurt that they want to burst and they keep going to insist to go bigger and bigger, then they face no oversight whatsoever. Yeah, they should. That's not an argument to get rid of oversight. That's a goal to clean up the oversight so that people can properly modify their bodies in healthy ways. How many cyberpunk stories are there of people over-modifying and literally hurting themselves? This is literally a thing in fucking fiction and nonfiction. This argument doesn't follow. Calls it a categorical error. He thinks the university is some extra thing, but it's just a word for things that he's already seen.
Gender dysphoria, in the colloquial sense, being a description of something that you feel or something that's going on internally, like, versus diagnosis, again, which is a classification of an observed set of phenomena, right? Like, what?
And again,
that's not the same as what bodily autonomy is.
Now, again, if WPATH 8 gets fully implemented, then you won't need gender dysphoria as a way to get these things. That's just going to be built into the system. And if you had universal health care, there would be no barrier to be able to get mental health. You fight the systemic reasons that are creating the gatekeeping in the US, being the insurance companies.
With that in mind, I have some questions. Suppose a cis woman goes through menopause, wakes up one morning and thinks, ugh, my body doesn't feel like my own. I feel anxious.
I reject this argument. We literally just covered this. She is literally trying to say that these are the same things.
But wait. Okay. So, I deal with PMDD, so no, this one comes up a lot, okay? The thing with menopause is that even if you are a cis woman who is getting an HRT, right, you're getting an estrogen replaced in your body as you're going through this to ease symptoms, that is still being overseen very carefully by a doctor. You are having symptoms of a medical, thing that is affecting you extremely negatively. So it's still being overseen by a doctor. It's like, oh my gosh, just...
Again, I'm not a trans medicalist. Nothing on this channel should ever suggest I'm a trans medicalist. I've defended fucking tree gender because I'm based as shit.
Even on our stream, there's somebody that uses star pronouns.
Yeah, and they're also based as shit. I'm a literal succubian. What the fuck are we doing right now? I am trying to do harm reduction. So again, I reject this argument because this idea that I look like a man is that dysphoria. In a way it is. And what I'll say is this, I still think there needs to be oversight. And here's what I'm going to say. We have a babu that we often take care of because their home life is awful. They're 17 years old, they're a cis girl and lesbian, and I love them like they're my own fucking daughter. They are my flesh and blood as far as I'm fucking concerned.
Oh no, absolutely, both of us, yeah.
And like we are literally just their transparents. Like that's what's up. So here's the thing. This kid's friend decided to keep saying, "Oh, you're manly. Oh, you're gonna be a trans man. Oh, you're gonna be this." And when what this Babu decided to express this as was like, it felt really uncomfortable. It felt like my womanhood wasn't being seen. It felt like I was like being made invisible. And it was the thing that made me realize that no, gender dysphoria can be experienced by a cis person. If you press hard enough, that trauma, that discomfort, that harm of being pushed in a direction that you don't internally resonate with. This is why we use the self-schema notion, emergent self-schema notion of gender. This poor girl went through and basically dealt with a very real cis version of gender dysphoria. The way that had to be dealt with was getting that other little bitch out of their life. I accept the notion that gender dysphoria is something that would work for cis people. No one is arguing that. What I'm arguing is that when we are talking about gender-affirming procedures, I actually think cis people have to be gate-kept more. Fuck them. So here's the thing. She then goes into this and says, I think it's important to explore this category error. I still don't believe it's a category error, but go off. Because it's rooted in the NHA's systemic transphobia. Here's where we're going to get in trouble. If a cis woman wants breast augmentation to correct uneven or undeveloped breasts, she may present to her GP with significant psychological distress and be referred to a plastic surgeon. And again, my argument would be is you need to double check that. That seems weird. But only a specialist in gender identity clinic can diagnose gender dysphoria. And that's where she's fucked up. We already covered this. The ICD-11 does not in any way cover gender dysphoria. It covers gender incongruity. That is an issue with the underlying philosophy of that text, not the concept of dysphoria as a whole, and certainly not the clinical diagnosis of gender dysphoria in the DSM-5. She's just wrong. And then she goes on to keep reifying this argument. Again, the wait lists are long enough. Yeah, and again, I agree. There is a very real error with gender incongruity. I think the ICD-11 fucked up. They said they were getting rid of gender identity disorder, and I don't think they went far enough. They didn't separate being trans from the disordered portion, and what it's done is now created this problem at a very deep categoric error. So again, I reject this notion that you need to take away the ways in which people are to some degree made sure that they are psychologically in the right place to be able to go through these procedures. I am going through SRS in a year, like under a year. I am terrified of that process. I definitely want someone to double check that I'm going to be okay.
Well, and again, an example of a therapist, right? Like actually working with you to help you achieve the goals that you want. Poppy's got a lot of trauma around a lot of different things, and having a therapist there doesn't mean no, and the answer is no, because you have trauma and this and that. No, it's let's do the best we can to get you in the healthiest spot to have this go as smoothly as possible so you have the best quality of life possible.
Tisha says, ironically, Abigail has committed a categorical error. She's trying to frame this as a gender dysphoria issue when it is literally a government policy issue. Fucking true.
Absolutely, yeah.
I don't know if I even want to go through the rest of this. It's just reifying the same stuff. It's stating that, again, there's this big call to freedom that's supposed to be based in epic and wonderful, but it's still conflating these things. She's still conflating that there's a very real issue between the UK and the US as far as which diagnoses we use, and she's just ignoring it. I am actually really surprised that someone who has a graduate level degree, or at least practice at a graduate level, would make such a tremendously stupid error.
Well, and notice the issue that we're all having now. Instead of like rallying around, the UK and pushing back on the ICD, now we're all having to debate what gender dysphoria even is and explain all this other bullshit, right? Like, and actually just defend what the fuck words mean instead of actually being able to deal with the real issue. Had there actually been accurate language at the start, we could actually be doing a lot more to push back on the ICD, which is more the issue here, okay? And the UK's, stupid systems.
Oh god, I'm gonna have to watch this now. Fuck.
Which sections are we?
We're just covering this like
got it.
10 like under 10-minute section.
Sounds good.
Oh, you can't hear the video? All right, I'll start it over. My apologies. I'll still say the
Here's
same thing.
the real shit. We are firmly in the territory of my opinion here. Not everyone agrees with what I'm about to argue. If I'd stayed in academia, this is probably what I'd have written my PhD on. As we've seen by now, medical transition in England, and let's not forget a lot of legal transition as well, hinges on first being diagnosed with gender dysphoria.
No. The reality is that no, that is not what we just saw. Gender dysphoria is acknowledged by the National Health Service, but they don't actually use that as a diagnosis. You don't get diagnosed with gender dysphoria. You get diagnosed with gender incongruence out of the ICD-11. So already, she's already started this off on a falsehood.
Which is supposedly the feeling of discomfort that arises when there is a disconnect between the sex you were assigned at birth and the gender you are.
No, I don't know what it is for the supposed not National Health Service one, but let's look. What is gender dysphoria? In adolescents and adults, a marked incongruence between one's experienced or expressed gender and assigned gender for at least 6 months' duration is manifested in at least two of the following: a marked incongruence between one's experienced and expressed gender and primary and/or secondary sexual characteristics. A strong desire to be rid of one's primary or secondary sexual characteristics because of a marked incongruence with one's experienced or expressed gender or in young adolescence. A desire to prevent the development or anticipated secondary sex characteristics, etc., etc., etc. B. The condition is associated with clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. We are not just talking about a discomfort. We are talking with something that is actively pathological that fucks with your life.
Right. Again, the colloquial use of gender dysphoria as a descriptor of you internally. Cool. This is the diagnosis that, can be evaluated by a clinician. B is really important. To get this diagnosis, you need to have clinically significant distress and impairment.
And also, let's be very clear. Look at these last couple. I actually had someone I had to give this diagnosis to earlier because they're non-binary, they don't show these top ones.
Mm-hmm.
A strong desire to be of another gender or an alternative gender different from one's assigned gender. That's why non-binary people are fucking valid. Shut the fuck up, LiQWYD. A strong desire to be treated as the other gender or some alternative gender different from one's assigned gender. A strong conviction that one has the typical feelings and reactions of the other gender.
Or some alternative gender different from one's assigned gender. Yeah.
Yes, social psych explainer. Yes. B, or what do we call it needs to cause problems part of the diagnosis, is in every single one of them. But it's important to mention because it needs to have that to be pathology.
I stress that because a lot of people may not be in a position to see ever even look at the DSM. Okay. I'm aware that I can sit next to Poppy and look at the DSM because Poppy and several of my other friends actively have copies on their computers. Okay. But not everyone can actually be here to read the DSM. So
yeah, so let me look at this real quick. So according to the National Health Service, gender dysphoria is not related to sexual orientation. So I'd have to look more into what the National Health Service specifically says about gender dysphoria to know. But again, the National Health Service doesn't set diagnostic criteria. The ICD-11, which is made by the World Health Organization, does. Let's move on. Do you see why this pissed me off so much?
No, I'm with you. Because this makes no sense.
And I think that this concept, as it is used in the NHS system, is a complete crock of shit. The philosopher Gilbert Ryle tells a story about a guy who goes to Oxford and asks to see the university. And they show him the colleges and the libraries and the quads. And at the end of the day, he says, yes, but where's the university? You haven't shown me that. And he's made a mistake, what philosophers call a category error. He thinks the university is its own building, but it's not. It's just the sum of all those ordinary buildings. A lot of people talk about dysphoria as if it was its own extra feeling. And I think that too is a category error. I don't think it is an extra feeling. I think it's just the sum of... And cis people also feel all those feelings. Maybe not about the same things or to the same intensity, but they do feel them.
Said they didn't.
If a cisgender woman goes through menopause and thinks, oh, my body...
Wait, with that logic, having gender dysphoria is being trans. That's how that just came out. Generally, at least in the colloquial thing, we use gender dysphoria as a description of the phenomena that we're experiencing, right?
Yeah.
That is the point. Except she goes, but no, that's not it.
She just thinks it's regular feelings, which then it wouldn't be clinically significant when, again, she's not even using the right term.
Yeah. Well, you could take that two ways, right? Either they're just regular feelings, so therefore, this doesn't exist in the first place, or being trans is just having these feelings anyway, so being trans is gender dysphoria, which isn't how words work or what that should mean.
Kellen McAllister's right, but it's not a diagnostic issue. The diagnosis is just the name we give to all of them. The category error is hers, not the ICD's.
I don't think it is an extra feeling. I think it's just the sum of...
Not according to the DSM-5.
Again, do you see what I mean, though? It essentially goes, being trans is just these feelings. It's just having feelings of shit.
Everyone who has experienced the actual real experience of gender dysphoria, you guys were just experiencing regular emotions. There was nothing outside of the ordinary about those. Just saying. Like, again, this is why people took this as invalidating. I was told to watch this. I'm already like a minute into this argument and going, she starts from a bad premise.
And cis people also feel all those feelings.
I agree.
Maybe not about the same things or to the same intensity, but they do feel them. If a cisgender woman goes through menopause and thinks, oh, my body...
Wait, did you just cite yourself? No, that was the article we just read. Anyway.
He feels bloated. It doesn't feel like my own. I'm anxious and depressed. Is that not gender dysphoria? If a cis man is skinny and can't grow a beard and looks at his peers and thinks, oh, I should be manlier, is that not gender dysphoria? If a cisgender woman has hair on her face and thinks, oh, I've got a moustache, I look like a man, I want to get laser hair removal to get rid of it, is that not dysphoria? I think
it is. And no one said you had to have dysphoria to be trans, which means, by definition, that diagnosis could be given to a cis person. She's just regurgitating the same argument. Let's skip ahead. Let's see if she... Because you know what? I have a fucking life. I want to move on. Let's see. Does she actually say anything useful?
From her GP. If a trans woman wants it, we have to go to the gender clinic and be diagnosed with gender dysphoria. When we feel those feelings, it's treated differently. And you might be saying, well, when cis people feel those things, that's body dysmorphia, not gender dysphoria. It is a different thing. But that's what I'm asking. Why is it different?
I don't think it is. And body dysmorphia is a different thing anyway.
No. Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, body dysmorphia's got a different set of definitions in the DSM, doesn't it? Like, it's got a different set of stuff. Again, I've met people who deal with both gender dysphoria and body dysmorphia. They're not the same thing. And, like, again, if we get enough research and we go, oh shit, we gotta update things, we update things. There's a reason. We're on the ICD-11, okay? And the DSM-5, all right? Like, shit does get updated when we figure out that there is a better way to go about things. I really love this framing because, like, being on the PMDD end of things, this whole idea that, like, oh no, women don't go through shit to, like, get things to deal with, like, menopause, periods, PMDD. This stuff is still a massive, huge mess in the PMDD world, too. And that's a lot of cis women and some trans masc people, okay? Or anyone, you know, AFAB in any format, basically. I really hate the framing that this somehow doesn't just, like, that this doesn't actually, like, affect women all the time. No, there's just as many issues that cis women are facing with all of this horse shit in the medical field.
Now, I will give her one thing is that, yes, one of the parentheses around gender dysphoria for adults is called transsexualism. And this is a leftover from the old days of fucking fucking autogynephilia and all that other bullshit. Do I like that it's still in there? No. Does it matter for this conversation? Also fucking no.
To which the only answer is, well, because you're trans. And that's exactly my point.
No. Body dysmorphia is when you have a profound level of obsessive anxiety around your body in a way that causes you to engage in harmful activities such as, let's see, starving yourself or causing yourself to spontaneously vomit. That is not the same thing as gender dysphoria, which I've already agreed to the premise that cis people experience it, and I've already argued against this premise, as has Zena, that cis people should have more psychological gatekeeping in regards to what we call cosmetic surgeries, because they can be just as problematic for them.
And a surgeon is not necessarily a trained mental health clinician, frankly.
Now, do I think gatekeeping needs to be done in a way that is gone? Yeah, I would like gatekeeping gone. I also would like people to be protected. Risk aversion is not the same thing as gatekeeping. That sounds like a Twitter anarchist argument.
Functionally, in the English clinical system, gender dysphoria just means the thing that trans people have.
Okay, then they are not using the same thing as what the DSM-5 has. And I've yet to find their definition beyond what the NHS says about it. Because they don't use that, they use the ICD.
And in that case, you might as well just call it mad disease. And it's not just the concept itself that raises my eyebrows. The history of it is also questionable. Being trans used to be considered a mental illness. Transsexuality, as it was then called, was added to the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders in 1980. And there was a...
True, but you don't use the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. You use the ICD. And the ICD had gender identity disorder. So again, I don't know why you keep changing goalposts. It's really weird.
Immediately a campaign to remove it. So in 2013, the American Psychiatric Association got together and said, we got to update this. And they assembled a committee. There were 12 doctors on that committee. As far as I can find, all of them were cis. Side note, one of them was Ray Blanchard, a name that all the trans people in the audience will know, because Blanchard has since been disgraced and his theories about us have been thrown out by the medical community and thoroughly debunked, including by other YouTubers more talented than me. This was the committee that pretty much invented the modern concept of gender dysphoria as it is used today. This team of 12 looked at the history of diagnosing trans people, looked for patterns in the medical literature, and came up with their new diagnosis, dysphoria. Unfortunately, there was a major problem with the data that they relied on, a problem which also makes the diagnosis extremely difficult to actually use. How do you diagnose someone with gender dysphoria? Or transsexuality, or mad disease, or whatever we're calling it this decade? When you get to the gender clinic, what does the specialist actually do? Well, they ask you questions, of course.
Wait.
This person, who has the power to decide what the rest of your life will look like, asks you questions to make sure that your answers...
Wait, okay. So we're already just mixing together, like, the US DSM and other places that use the ICD and just mixing it all together in a pot, because it's all the same thing, apparently.
And again, yeah, Blanchard was in there, but so were other doctors. Also, I want to be clear, Blanchard has been disgraced because of his typology. His other research he did under the course of his doctorate, I don't know if all of it's been... I'd have to look, because I haven't looked at... I don't give a fuck about Ray Blanchard, so I haven't looked at his research recently. But I don't know if all of it's been disgraced. But the thing is that, like, again, we're just speaking in very wide swaths.
I love the they ask you questions stuff. Like, what else?
What are we supposed to do? Is there a blood test? Like, again, this feels like, again, this is in the DSM, so it's a part of the statistics of mental illness. You don't have to have gender dysphoria to be trans. The American Psychiatric Association, the guys who made the DSM, say this. This feels like boiling ADHD down to crackhead squirrel energy. Fucking true.
No, it super does.
Okay, I'm going to give her like another minute or two to actually get to something like an argument, because this is insane.
Yeah.
Fit the ones they have in their textbook. And can you guess what the problem is? We lie! Or not even necessarily lie, but just, we tell them what they want to hear. There's a...
Yes, we gamed the system. This is in Julia Serrano's book. Because it used to be under gender identity disorder. It used to be under a different classification. They talked about this. And do we lie? Sure. But most clinicians know when you're lying to them. I know all of the time. I don't take offense to it anymore. Usually when a person lies, it's because they have a good reason.
Well, and I think your training also teaches you that lying is still a form of communication. Something's being communicated, right?
Yes, and also, like, if a client lies to me because they really want that diagnosis, and I don't see any reason why they shouldn't have it, I'll still give it to them.
Because there's still other, like, data that you evaluate
because
with.
There's other criteria you can go by. This makes no sense. Will you ask them questions? Yes. The same way you would look for things like depression, or anxiety, or adjustment disorders, or any other thing in the DSM.
It's pretty regular practice that your, your PCP may do, like, an inventory with you and just ask you questions about, depression and anxiety and stuff, just to screen you. That's pretty regular. Like,
yeah, how else would you find out? Like, again,
they're psychic.
That's right. I
They're
forgot. We're psychic.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Let's skip ahead because, again, this is nonsense. Let's see.
Who is almost certainly cis. And they ask you, so, when did you know? Of course you're going to say, oh, ever since I was a child. Yeah, I wore my mother's dress.
No one in my office has ever since a child. This is a straw man that does not exist. Maybe it does in the UK because of their gender incongruity problems. I can tell you, I have seen hundreds of trans people, and none of them, like almost no one has ever said in their childhood. Most people talk about it in adolescence, later in adulthood, or a lot of them are like their 30s or 40s.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's a really common narrative that people figure out that they're trans.
She's just quoting the fucking Julia Serrano stuff from the 80s and 90s. Like, it has that same vibe.
Well, it has except Serrano, like, had more data and made more sense, okay? But, like, because there really was a narrative that I knew of, especially trans people, a lot of, actually, it was trans, gay, people who were gay, bi, lesbian, whatever, would come out and figure it out much later in life because they were finally in a place where it was safe to do so, right? Like, but still, like, wow, yeah.
Yeah, in gatekeeping systems, there was previously a script. This was very true in the United States circa 80s, 90s, and the 70s, because the way gender identity disorder worked is you had to basically have the doctor be there as a gatekeeping measure. And a lot of times people would have to play up stuff, the doctors would catch on to it and think you were lying and stop you. Again, I'm not saying it was good, but the whole point of changing gender dysphoria, what the purpose of this was to fix it. And you'll notice Blanchard was one voice on there, and the disorder still is argued as not being required to be trans, despite the fact that one of the most massive transphobes and chasers was on that group. What is she talking about? We've already proven the ICD doesn't use gender dysphoria. The National Health Service might, but they don't use it as diagnosis. They use the ICD-11, so they use gender incongruity. What are we doing right now? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. What?
I called myself Wendy. Like, all I want is to be a 1950s housewife and marry a man. Of course you're going to say that.
Oh my God, I'm skipping ahead because I hate
no,
this.
we're just
Okay, please make an argument.
Childhood. Were you abused as a child? What toys did you play with? Were you abused as a child? Which other children did you choose to play with? Were you abused as a child?
I have never asked anyone that. It is on a form. If they tell me yes, then I deal with it. If not, then it never comes up again. Who hurt you? Was it the doctor who didn't respond to the 133 emails? Because I feel like you are talking about a very trope experience that I don't think any of my clients have ever had. Skip ahead.
Just a collective invention. I remind you that getting trans
Like all diagnoses. Moving on.
healthcare in England, and a lot of legal transition too, requires you to go through that interrogation first. That's the real reason the waiting list is so long. There are very few specialists who conduct these assessments.
Apparently it's because the UK and the National Health Service hasn't instituted WPATH 8. You know, the World Professional Association of Trans Healthcare? I don't understand.
Again, you could just use your platform to be like, hey, get your shit together, massive organizations, because you suck. But here we are, trying to talk about gender dysphoria in the DSM in a different country than yours.
And none of her arguments actually lead to why the DSM is wrong. She said on Twitter that the research around it was wrong. She's yet to demonstrate that. We're halfway through, and she hasn't said shit. Okay, I guess we'll keep going.
It's hard to recruit people to do the job of asking strangers how they jack off. But even if there were 1 million of them, even if the asking strangers how they jack off sector became the biggest employer in the country, I just don't think it's a valuable clinical diagnosis. I don't think it even makes sense. And it's also a little bit insulting that I have to do that, but a cis person doesn't.
Comparison.
But there have been calls for years internationally to ditch the clinical use of dysphoria and just give trans people healthcare without that extra step of a diagnosis. There
But that step already doesn't... What?
are some practical hurdles, to be sure. The diagnostic requirement is very baked into the NHS and British law. In 1999, there was a landmark legal case. A trust in Lancashire announced they weren't going to fund transition anymore on the grounds that it was merely cosmetic, and they were sued by 3 trans patients who said actually it was necessary to alleviate their gender identity disorder, as it was called at the time. The patients won, which meant that we have a right to free transition, but it also codified the idea that we need to be diagnosed with something first. The NHS tries to...
So that seems like a UK issue then. It's UK law fucking with with gender incongruity, but that has nothing to do with dysphoria. Why are we talking about the DSM-5 when you guys use the ICD-11?
And again, that case doesn't even sound relevant to this exact thing anymore. Like, I get that the laws suck, it happens sometimes. Like, what?
I was told to watch this because it would fix it.
It's just made it...
It's just made me not want to watch any of her videos.
Well, this is such a bad amount of research. Like, what are the first things you gotta do when you are starting a research paper? I don't care if you are in the 5th grade, if you are in the 12th grade, or if you are a graduate student. You need to look up the definitions of the terms that you are using. That's just plain and simple. You should absolutely be defining the things that you are using with credible sources. That's the first thing.
So the problem I have with this argument, and I'll say this more at the end, is that it's based on a vagary, and that vagary is basically working on your guys' ignorance. And we're going to get to that in a minute, but I just want to try to get through this real quick.
Illness rather than maximize health. Those are not necessarily the same thing. So gender dysphoria provides an illness that they can respond to. Practical hurdle.
And in the United States, unfortunately, you need those codes to get paid. Change the system.
Simplicon says that the medical model can be very appealing to able-bodied people because it soothes our anxiety. I don't want to think about the fact that society is unfair or that the systems I'm part of exclude people. I definitely don't want to think about the fact that I could acquire a disability and then I'd be the one who is excluded. So the
This whole video is about the British healthcare system and how the system needs to be changed. Bad envious coder, I'm going to be really clear. Then why is she talking about gender dysphoria? Why? Oh, wait. She's switching terms and playing a shell game with language because she doesn't actually know what she's talking about. Every time she says gender dysphoria, I want to scream because she's using the colloquial definition, not the diagnostic criteria. But then she cites the DSM-5. So now we're talking about the diagnostic criteria, except the UK doesn't use the DSM-5. It uses the ICD-11, and that doesn't have gender dysphoria in it. It has fucking gender incongruity. What is going on?
Medical model allows me to imagine that there is a very distinct line between...
Okay, I know about the medical model issues. I also know about Foucault. I get it. Overpathologization is an issue. I agree with neurodiversity. I've talked about it on this stream. What the fuck?
The other really weird part too, when we're dealing with the DSM in the US, or even like, I go to the doctor's office, okay? They do put in codes in order to get paid. They do track stuff. They do take notes. They have a whole bunch of notes from, you know, my interactions with them during the session. Those are important. They look at those. They keep track of those. Trust me, I've been to so many different doctors that like, no, I know what they say, especially because I could see it in my chart, all right? And that still isn't the same thing as like, even if they have to write down, hey, you are dealing with this thing, it is just the word for that thing, okay? That's it. Like, I do not personally have to do anything with that further unless I want to. Oh God, my doctor wrote down the thing so that way my insurance will cover this thing. Oh God.
Because
so
the system
horrible.
is inherently misframed. So here's the thing.
But again, my doctor's the person who's actually still treating me with like respect and care. I get that the insurance companies suck, but it's, God damn it, it's not that deep if my doctor has to write down gender dysphoria to get my medication covered. All right? Like, what the hell? It's not that big of a deal here. And we're talking about the DSM, and she keeps confusing that with the ICD. Like, don't use the US stuff to talk about the UK. It's not the same.
All right, let's go through this. I put it up to 175 because I need this to end.
of the universe. If you want to change sex, it's possible. For all of human history, we've had this divide between men and women. But if you want to cross that divide, if you want to transcend it entirely and be neither, it's possible. In particular, hold in one hand all of masculinity. Thor,
No
Leonidas,
argument.
Beowulf, James Bond, Andrew Tate, Jordan Peterson, all of them. And in the other, hold just 2 milligrams. But when you're a trans woman, you can take all of that and just...
Male-dominated gender hierarchy where it is assumed that men are better than women and that masculinity is superior to femininity, there is no greater threat than the existence of trans women, who despite being born male and inheriting male
This is just the
presuppose
argument
supremacy of
Julia
maleness
Sorrow, I
and
find
masculinity.
I think that some cis people are made a little bit anxious by that. I think they like to imagine that male and female are naturally occurring, stable categories and that we are just the exceptions that
This
prove
is
the
the
rule.
bimodal
I think they
argument.
like to imagine that there is a
We've already
clear
talked
line
about the trans
and
people
also
by
creates a
definition.
class...
We already talked about the fact that trans people by definition throw a monkey wrench in gendered society. Yeah, I doubt she spoke to anybody in my field. I'm gonna try to I'm just gonna let her play through to the end of this section and then I'm gonna go off.
of specialists who can patrol that line and decide who gets across. Hell, there are some trans people who like that line being there. There are some, not naming names, who say, I'm a real transsexual. I've been diagnosed with the mental illness that is gender dysphoria.
I know,
Not like all
Marcus
these
did.
tender queer
I know.
non-binary teenagers
I
with their
know.
green
We're
hair
all
and
mad
their
about
Lucy and
Marcus
Yak
did.
dungarees. And I'm like, babes, you've been diagnosed with baloney. Stafford Beer famously said that the purpose of a system is what it does. And what he meant was there's no point claiming a system's job is to do something it consistently fails to do. It functions how it functions, it gives the outputs it gives. With that outlook, I don't think anyone can really claim that the NHS's current system exists to help trans patients. It might occasionally do that as a side effect, but in my opinion, its real function, its main output, is control. NHS...
Okay, then okay. Oh, fuck me. All right, so
Oh,
sorry.
That's okay. Oh God, kisses.
So here's I didn't mean that. Here's the thing. I agree with the underlying spirit of this. If I want to be fair and try to steelman Abigail, if I ignore the utter ignorancy that she is speaking with, then I can see the argument that there needs to be these underlying changes because there is ways that these are basically presented as control mechanisms. The problem being is that she went on Twitter and said this. This has not been demonstrated. None of this has been demonstrated. Just because those people were, again, what is this, identity politics? Because these people were cis, that somehow means the diagnosis is real, that people's felt experience isn't real. And the problem is that, again, Probably because gender dysphoria is made up based on the unreliable data of a bunch of cis doctors, multiple of whom have since been disgraced. We shouldn't need some cis person's fantasy diagnosis to transition. Again, she has not demonstrated this in any of the stuff we've watched. None. I have no problem diagnosing somebody with gender dysphoria who's a cis person because, again, I don't think that's necessary. That requirement also, again, if trans people don't need to have dysphoria to transition, then by definition, it doesn't necessarily have to go to cis people, regardless of what they state. We can modify things as we need. The fact of the matter is that, again, she has not demonstrated this. She's claiming this data is unreliable and hinting at this vague conspiracy of control, but that's all it is. It's vague conspiracy of control with no actual data. And this is going to appeal to the hardcore lefties who are like big anarchists and yay, we got to take down systems. And what it's going to do is if you actually did something like this, it would fuck over millions of trans people who need healthcare, who get healthcare because of the existence of these systems. I'm not saying not saying not to fix them, not to change them. Zena and I are the first that want to see these things done.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
But you don't have to have gender dysphoria to be trans. The American Psychiatric Association said so. I covered it earlier. The National Health Service doesn't use gender dysphoria. They talk about it as an experience, but the genuine thing they use is the ICD-11, and they use gender incongruence. We are playing with terms in a really weird way that has undercut all of her message in the most inconsistent way humanly possible. In fact, I have never seen any other essayist, save for like Mule, make this big of just a factual error.
Well, and like, again, it prevents everybody from actually understanding the system and actually being able to advocate properly. Tons and tons of people have watched this video and have been arguing with us all night. Okay, and so now lots of people have the exact wrong information that is not going to help them advocate. It is going to do the exact opposite.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with people saying body dysmorphia and body and gender dysphoria are different or are the same thing. I disagree as far as how I would engage with treatment and deal with a person in regards to that. I just don't understand why people thought this was so based. It sounds utterly idiotic to me. The underlying philosophy makes sense, but the actual examples, the actual presentation, we've now looked through her article, her video, her fucking tweets. Could you guys actually, could somebody who actually supports this make it make sense to me?
Well, and as somebody who's like AFAB over here, having I love all of her examples about cis women, which are just fucking warped. No, again, I have a disorder that is really fucking messy that most doctors don't even know about. Literally, most of them don't even know what it is. All right? You don't think that there's, just as much weird gatekeeping and bullshit with, hormones and menopause and shit? No, cis people with PMDD are getting shit on because of the weird gatekeeping that we have around hormones and bullshit. And this whole need for, women to be pregnant and whatnot. And it's goddamn. And this shit fucks us up because would I love to see more research for testosterone for women dealing with this? Absolutely. Fuck's sake, a lot of us are pretty desperate in this disorder, all right? But no, her framing it just twists everything so much. It feels so invalidating to shit on cis people's experience with crap in the medical system too, while we're trying to somehow advocate for trans stuff as if we're not all dealing with a lot of bullshit already. There's a much better way to go about this. And I really just hate that, those experiences get pitted against each other.
So here's a summary of what my problem is with this. And this, I now that you've gone through this and seeing why I've been so angry about it.
Yeah, well, PMDD rage was not gonna...
No, PMDD would have torn up my computer. But do you see why this has been so infuriating?
No, I do.
People are like, this is base, and then a bunch of people are like, you're invalidating my gender dysphoria. You are literally saying the thing that causes me harm. And again, I'm not even against DIY. I'm going to come back to this. If you think you can handle it and you have a doctor who's willing to work with you on it, or just get blood work or whatnot, do it. Be safe about it, but do it. I don't have a problem with people working around systems when systems don't work. Mm-hmm. I can hold both of these views. But to explain this one more time, just so everybody's clear, Philosophy Tube's argument doesn't make sense because gender dysphoria, like any other diagnosis, is a construct by which a number of symptoms are put together to make sense of a particular phenomenon that causes very real social, job, or whatever level of dysfunction, or causes the person significantly clinical distress. The problem with her argument is that she is making an argument stating that this is based on unreliable data, but nothing in her video actually supported that. Nothing in her article actually supported that. She just sort of throws it out flippantly and then mentions Blanchard as sort of a way to invalidate it when, again, not all of Blanchard's research was necessarily like all of just his typology. I'm not saying he's a good guy. I'm not saying I agree with his shit. But again, like, there's other research he was affiliated with. You need to go piece by piece through that. I haven't done that because I don't fucking care. It doesn't help that the medical system interchanges gender dysphoria and the ICD-11 with gender incongruence. Oh, and she's responding to that. Yeah, it's frustrating because if they do use those interchangeably, the problem is that gender incongruence has different criteria, and the UK uses the ICD-11. She's playing a shell game because she's trying to make a really cool, very lefty libertarian argument about how we need to be free and how we need all this thing away from the state. And I agree with all of that. But if you're going to make those arguments, make them correctly. My fucking email is available, for fuck's sakes.
That's true.
ZZ is available during the day. You could have reached out. I agree with the underlying premise, but the overall arguments are bad. This is bad. This does harm. And if people actually were able to institute this in a systemic way, it would mean a tremendous amount of problems for people that already get their stuff. Am I saying that gender dysphoria should be the thing that makes you trans? No, because it's not. It's not experientially. It's certainly not at a clinical level. This is just the reality. You do not need dysphoria to be trans. Binary or non-binary or xenogender. Does not matter. Does not matter at all. This is a non-argument. If that's how it is in the UK, fair. But then talk about the UK and keep the DSM out of your dirty little mouth. There are very real problems with the system that need to be fixed. I am not disagreeing with that. I'm a fucking lefty. Of course I want the system to be better. I think the system should fucking serve us. But I want it to serve us in a way that makes sure it takes care of people, not controls them. And this weird, like, conspiracy theory shit. No, like, Netspace is right. Hits the blunt. Yo, like, the gender dysphoria stuff isn't even real. It's all about the system, how it takes advantage of us, man.
Damn.
That's the same vibe. I don't understand how anyone fell for this.
And again, none of her arguments really work for how it goes in the US.
There's real gatekeeping and nothing in her arguments address it. Maybe in the UK, in certain circumstances. But again, the type of, like, playing up and being like, I've been wearing my mom's heels since I was 3 years old. No one does that.
That's a news narrative that loves...
No, that's a narrative that existed back when you had to do this in, like, the 80s and 90s.
Well, that and like, the news played that up really, really hardcore is what I mean. Like, news cycles played up those particular cases really, really well, because a lot of times they could find ways to spin that stuff really positively, and and it was a mess, right? But, like, okay, it's been a while. We've got other narratives out there now. It's really fine.
This is my problem with Philosophy Tube. I still think her best video, and this is going to get me hate, is Queer. One, it has musical numbers, and I have ADHD. I love musical numbers. The other thing is that I actually think it has one of her most concise arguments. A lot of her stuff before then, I didn't enjoy a lot of it. There were some of them that was good. I haven't watched a lot of her stuff since then, and it's not because I don't like Abigail, it's that I didn't really like her stuff much beforehand. It's not about her transitioning. I watched her come out video because it was really good, but it's still not her best video in my opinion. I still think that's queer.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is that this is the problem I have with her, is that I feel like she gets on an idea and it works really well, and then she gets on a tear about it and it just goes off. And she said at the beginning, this is her take, but her take is ignorant as shit, and she should know better. So yeah, I renounce everyone on this one.
True.
I renounce the fucking trans medicalists who fucking flipped out about this and tried to misgender her. I fucking renounce the fucking, like, weird anarchist people that were like, oh, this is base, this is the coolest thing ever. Oh my god, you know, why can't people have why can people have a boob job and it's not, like, hindered in some way? It should be. So here's the thing. We need to fix these systems in real ways, not just by wonderful philosophical platitudes. And that's the problem I have with Abigail Thorne's video, is it's just philosophical platitudes pretending to be facts. So if that makes me somehow not a tran, or somehow makes me a trans medicalist, or somehow makes me not based, I don't really give a shit. Because I'm the one that still helps people get fucking transitioning medical care. I'm the one out there writing letters and shit. So the fact of the matter is, I'm actually out in the world doing something about this. In my job, day to fucking day. I have 85% trans people in my fucking docket. Fucking fight me. You have anything else?
No, call it here.
Yeah. But we'll see you in the next one. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching. If you could like, comment, and subscribe, we'd really appreciate it. If you want to support the channel further, you could go to patreon.com/ZenaandPoppy, and you could become a patron for as low as $3. If you want to support us further, you could donate below with a super thanks comment, or you could, in fact, even go to our website, which is currently transgrowtherapist.org. You can go there and either donate directly, or you can even get a subscription and get a cool colored name and chat next time we stream. Anyway, thank you again.